December 16th, 1773. The air was damp and cold in Boston, Massachusetts. John Adams, Samuel Adams, Paul Revere, and many others who were part of the rebellious group of men recognized as the Sons of Liberty gathered together to take action. These brave men dressed themselves in Indian garb, ready to raid 3 ships at Boston Harbor, including the Dartmouth, the Eleanor, and the Beaver. Their target, imported British tea. England had repealed all prior taxes due to colonist protest, except the tax on tea. For the rebellious men at Boston and all over the colonies, this wasn't enough. The tax on tea gave British merchants an advantage over the colonists in the market. The Sons of Liberty don't note, but their actions will be remembered as one of the most famous protests in American history, known as the Boston Tea Party. The church in England was becoming corrupt and oppressive. The Puritans were persecuted and made fun of for their beliefs. Seeking to worship freely, they left England with the intent to become a city upon a hill for both their children and their brothers and sisters back in England. 7 generations after the arrival, America has become flooded with people seeking new lives. After some rebellion, the King of England sent 4,000 redcoats to establish orders in Boston. The Puritans that had come to the New World seeking to worship freely, unfortunately, now were under the watchful eye of the British. In 1764, the British Parliament enacted the Sugar Act. The specific act was enabled to raise revenue for Parliament. England had been fighting the French in the 7-Year War and needed to find a way to pay off their debts. With this new tax, they can begin to have more control over the colonies, plus gain money that was well needed for Britain. The American colonists were not very pleased with this act and decided to protest. In Boston, participants in a town meeting began to cry out, "Taxation without representation," and requested for some form of united protest throughout the colonies.
Taxation from Britain was becoming more and more popular in the colonies. Even though Britain knew that these taxes would frustrate the colonists, Britain established 2 more taxes, the Quartering Act and the Stamp Act. The Quartering Act required the colonies to provide barracks and supplies to British troops, and the Stamp Act required the colonists to pay taxes for newspapers, almanacs, pamphlets, broadsides, legal documents, dice, and playing cards. Frustrated by these taxes, the colonies began to protest once again by boycotting these British goods. Losing money, the British agreed to repeal these taxes, but the repeal of these taxes did not mean that Great Britain was surrendering all control over its colonies. That is why Britain then established the Declaratory Act the same day they repealed the Stamp Act. The Declaratory Act said that Parliament could make laws binding the American colonies. With this act being enforced all throughout the colonies, Britain knew that nobody could help the colonists from their chains.
In 1776, British Parliament established the Townshend Acts, which helped to pay for the expenses involved in governing the American colonies. This act taxed glass, lead, paint, paper, and tea. The Townshend Act was met with such opposition, Parliament partially repealed many of the taxes. However, the Tea Act remained, forcing colonists to buy only British tea. Although the tea was cheaper, it was also taxed, and this angered not only Boston, but also the rest of the colonies. Bostonians told the British cargo ships to take their tea and leave, but the shipmasters refused. The Sons of Liberty saw nothing left to do but take action. They marched aboard the 3 vessels with only one purpose, to destroy the tea aboard each ship. On the morning of December 17th, as the sun rose over Boston, onlookers saw some 342 chests set afloat in Boston Harbor. That's more than $1 million worth of tea ruined. The colonists set an example of their inalienable rights. Everything else aboard the ship was left intact. No locks were broken or doors kicked down. All to send one clear message: the Tea Act was intolerable and wrong. Astounded by this act of rebellion, Parliament cracked down on Boston, implementing the Coercive Acts, which were several laws to punish Massachusetts. The Boston Port Bill banning the loading and unloading of any ships in Boston Harbor until the cost of damage could be repaid. The Massachusetts Government Act put the election of most government officials under the control of the Crown. Instantly, Britain seized Boston's government and took control of the justice system in an attempt to control the colony. Also, the Quartering Act, stating that any British troop could now be quartered in any occupied dwelling. However, these forms of punishment were not enough to put out the patriotic spirit. The colonies would prepare for war. Not more than a year and a half later, the 13 colonies will declare war on England for their independence. The Patriots were led by the most noble men in America. They fought for their country and for their freedom, while the British fought only for their king. The grueling battle lasted 7 years, ending with the victorious American flag. Galatians 5:1 says, "For freedom Christ has set us free. Stand firm, therefore, and do not submit again to a yoke of slavery." The word tells us to stand up, firm in the commandments the Lord has given us, and never give in to anything that is of this world, for we have no reason to submit. Christ has set us free. The Puritans and so many others traveled across the Atlantic so as to be free of Britain's corruption. And now, the Sons of Liberty realize they must stand firm to protect this valuable freedom. The American Revolution, the greatest battle in our heritage, was all started by the Boston Tea Party, the greatest civil disobedience of all time.